The morning sun crept softly over Willow Park, painting it in hues of gentle gold. Everything was still, and the day held a quiet serenity. An elderly man, Henry Sullivan, sat on his favorite bench, the very same bench he'd sat on every morning for decades. His hands, weathered by time and life's hardships, cradled a cup of steaming coffee. His breath, a cloud in the crisp morning air, blended with the whispers of trees and distant bird songs. Beside him lay a cane, worn smooth from years of loyal service. Today, though, he didn't just feel the usual comfort of the park, but a heavy, lingering sense of something unspoken in the air. Unbeknownst to Henry, someone else sat quietly behind him, partially hidden by a cluster of flowering bushes. This observer, a figure known to few but well acquainted with Henry's long-standing presence in the neighborhood, watched as Henry sipped his coffee and leafed through his folded newspaper. The man's gaze never left Henry, his posture tense, as though he anticipated something big, something unexpected. Just as the early risers began to populate the park, joggers, dog walkers, and parents with strollers, a figure cut sharply across the path, disrupting the tranquility of the morning. It was Officer Green, a young and overly confident cop with a badge that gleamed in the sun, giving him an air of authority that almost overshadowed his inexperience. His eyes scanned the park with the scrutiny of a hunter. Then his gaze fell on Henry, and it didn't take long for a sense of suspicion to darken his face. Without hesitation, Officer Green strode over, his hand resting confidently on his hip near his holster. As he approached, Henry looked up, his peaceful expression turning into one of mild concern as the officer stopped right in front of him. "Good morning, sir," Henry said, folding his paper and meeting the officer's gaze. Officer Green, however, didn't return the courtesy. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" His voice was cold, laced with accusation. Henry, a little taken aback, replied gently, "Just reading the paper, enjoying my coffee, same as I do every morning." He smiled softly, but Green's suspicious glare didn't waver. "This park," Green started, his tone more forceful, "is for the residents of this neighborhood. I haven't seen you around here before." He crossed his arms, as if daring Henry to prove otherwise. The familiar ache of frustration gripped Henry's chest. This was his neighborhood. He'd lived here for more than 40 years, longer than Officer Green had been alive. But Henry knew the game and maintained his composure. "Young man, I've lived here for decades. I've probably spent more mornings on this bench than you have years in this town." Green narrowed his eyes, his fingers tapping his badge impatiently. "Well then, can you prove it? Got any ID on you?" His demand, though straightforward, carried an edge that Henry recognized all too well. At this point, Henry's heart raced. Not with fear, but with a deep, familiar frustration. He took a deep breath, struggling to keep his voice even. "I don't have to prove anything to you. This is a public park. I've every right to be here, just like anyone else." But Green's face twisted in anger, and he leaned closer, looming over Henry. "Listen, old man," he sneered. "I don't have time for stories. Either you move along, or I'll be forced to take you in for trespassing and resisting an officer." The threat lingered, sharp and cold. Henry's grip on his cane tightened, his knuckles white. He tried to stay calm, but years of memories, of fighting for respect, of struggling for dignity, surged within him. He looked the officer in the eye, defiant yet dignified. "I am not a trespasser. I helped build this park. Every tree, every path. I was part of the community that made it happen. This isn't just a park to me. It's a piece of my life." The officer's face flushed with anger, his expression hardening. In a swift motion, he grabbed Henry's arm, jerking him forward. Pain shot through Henry's shoulder, and he gasped, his cane clattering to the ground as he fought to keep his balance. Suddenly, from behind, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Both men froze, turning to see a tall, imposing figure striding toward them. It was Chief Marcus Blake, a seasoned leader with a steely expression that demanded respect. Officer Green's face paled as recognition dawned. He released Henry's arm and took a step back, his bravado evaporating. "Chief Blake," he stammered, "I didn't realize you were." "I don't need excuses," Chief Blake interrupted, his voice sharp. He turned to Henry, his gaze softening. "Are you all right, Mr. Sullivan?" Henry nodded, though his breathing was shallow, and he winced as he rubbed his shoulder. "I'll be fine, thank you, Chief." There was a faint smile of relief on his face. The chief looked back at Officer Green, his expression now a mixture of disappointment and controlled anger. "What exactly did you think you were doing, Officer Green?" The young officer shifted uncomfortably. "I was investigating a potential loitering situation. The suspect couldn't provide proof of residency." "Suspect?" Chief Blake's voice was sharp. "Mr. Sullivan is a respected member of this community. He's contributed more to this neighborhood than you could ever imagine. He's no suspect." Green's face turned pale as he grasped the gravity of his mistake. "I didn't know, sir. I was just following procedure." Chief Blake's gaze hardened. "Procedure doesn't excuse harassment. We're here to protect and serve, not to intimidate and alienate the very people we're meant to protect." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he gestured toward the path. "Return to the station, Officer Green. We'll discuss this further." As Green retreated, his shoulders slumped, the chief turned to Henry once more. "Mr. Sullivan, I apologize. This was completely unacceptable. We're working hard to address these issues, but clearly, we still have work to do." Henry nodded, a look of resignation in his eyes. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. But I can't help but feel like I've been here before, fighting the same battles." The chief's face softened with empathy. "I understand, Mr. Sullivan, but maybe this can be a moment for change. Would you consider sharing your experiences with my officers? They need to hear from someone who's seen what you have, someone who understands the value of true community." Henry paused, thoughtful. His years of struggle and resilience came rushing back. It wasn't an easy decision, but he knew it was the right one. "All right," he said slowly. "If it can help prevent this from happening to someone else, I'll do it." In the following days, Henry spoke to the officers about his life, his struggles, and his vision for a community where everyone felt they belonged. He told stories of his youth, of the moments that defined him, and of the battles that had both worn him down and lifted him up. The officers listened, some uncomfortable, others moved. And slowly, a change began to take root. The story doesn't end there. Weeks later, as Henry sat on his bench once again, a familiar figure approached. Officer Green, now out of uniform, his expression humble. He asked to sit, and Henry gestured for him to join. "Mr. Sullivan," Green began, his voice low, "I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I was wrong. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I regret it." Henry studied the young man, his face softened with age and wisdom. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. That's the first step toward change." Green nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "I want to do better. I want to make things right." And with that, a bond was formed. Together they began to work on community programs, bridging gaps, and building understanding. The park, once a place of pain and confrontation, became a symbol of hope and reconciliation. And as the seasons changed, Henry's legacy grew, not just in the park he helped create, but in the hearts of those who learned from him, inspired to carry forward the vision of a better, more united community. In the end, it wasn't about proving himself to anyone. It was about standing up for what was right, even in the face of adversity. And through his quiet strength, Henry showed everyone that change, however slow, was always possible. As the days passed, Henry's presence at Willow Park became more significant, a daily ritual observed by the people who lived nearby. More than ever, he drew quiet respect from his neighbors who had witnessed his dignity in the face of Officer Green's aggression. Henry's life story became a tale shared over backyard fences, at neighborhood gatherings, and in hushed conversations, a story of resilience that somehow felt new and relevant with every telling. One morning, as the first rays of dawn cast long shadows over the park, Henry sat on his favorite bench, sipping his coffee. He watched the trees sway gently in the breeze, finding solace in the quiet beauty of the moment. Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice a young mother approach with a stroller. Her name was Leah, and though they hadn't spoken much before, she had often seen Henry in the park. "Mr. Sullivan," she said softly, almost hesitantly, "may I sit with you?" Henry looked up, his warm smile inviting her to take a seat. "Of course, Leah. Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," she replied, but there was something on her mind. After a moment, she added, "I just wanted to thank you for everything. What you did, standing up for yourself and for all of us, really. It meant a lot." Henry's eyes softened, touched by her words. Thank you, Leah. Sometimes you just have to speak up when the world tries to quiet you down. Leah nodded then, almost as if gathering her courage, she continued. My son, he's only 2, but I worry about the world he'll grow up in. I worry he'll face the same kind of prejudice you did, or worse. How do you keep going? Henry let out a gentle sigh, his gaze turning distant as he thought back on his life. It's not easy, he admitted, a faint tremor in his voice. There were times I thought about giving up, but every time I see a child playing here, every time I see families enjoying this park, it reminds me why it's all worth it. It's those little moments, Leah. They keep us going. Leah looked at him with admiration, a new sense of hope lighting her eyes. Before she left, she placed a hand on Henry's shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Their conversation set off a ripple effect. Soon, more people began approaching Henry in the park, each with their own stories, their own burdens. Some asked for advice, while others just wanted to share a quiet moment of solidarity. Henry became more than a fixture in the park. He became a pillar of wisdom, a keeper of the community's unspoken history. But one evening, an unexpected visitor arrived, Chief Marcus Blake. He approached Henry with an air of quiet purpose, as if bracing himself for a difficult conversation. Henry noticed the chief's strained expression and gestured for him to take a seat. Evening, Henry, Chief Blake greeted him, his voice unusually somber. Good evening, Chief. What brings you here at this hour? Henry's eyes twinkled with curiosity, but his intuition told him something serious was on Chief Blake's mind. Chief Blake took a deep breath, gathering his words. I came to talk about Officer Green. Henry's face remained calm, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Is that so? The chief nodded, clearly weighing his next words carefully. Officer Green has been struggling since the incident. I've been watching him closely, trying to guide him, but I think he's finally realized the impact of his actions. He asked if he could speak to you directly, if you'd be willing. Henry's expression softened, but he remained thoughtful. Do you think he's truly ready to face what he did? Or is he just looking for closure? I think he's ready, Henry. I believe he's had a wake-up call, the chief replied earnestly. But, of course, it's your choice. Henry thought for a moment. Gazing out over the park, he considered everything he'd been through, all the moments of quiet strength he'd summoned just to keep going. He'd always believed in the power of forgiveness, yet he knew it wasn't a simple matter. He wanted to make sure Officer Green was ready to take real responsibility. All right, he said finally, his voice steady. I'll meet with him, but not here in the park. Somewhere more private? This park? It's a place of peace for me, and I don't want that disturbed. Chief Blake nodded in understanding. I'll make the arrangements, Henry. Thank you. A few days later, Henry found himself in a quiet, empty community center, waiting for Officer Green. The air was thick with anticipation, and Henry felt a mix of emotions as he waited. When the door opened, Officer Green stepped in, no longer in his police uniform, but dressed casually, looking more like an ordinary young man than an authority figure. Mr. Sullivan, Green began, his voice almost a whisper, thank you for meeting with me. I didn't expect you to agree. Henry gave a slight nod, motioning for Green to sit. Go on, son. Tell me why you're here. Green hesitated, swallowing hard. He looked down, unable to meet Henry's eyes. I don't even know where to start. I was so sure I was doing the right thing that day. I never even stopped to consider what it would mean for you or for anyone. I've been trying to figure out how to make amends, but I know I can't undo what happened. Henry listened intently, his gaze steady but not unkind. Why did you assume I didn't belong in the park? He asked quietly, his question sharp yet measured. Green looked up, pain flickering across his face. I guess I let my assumptions get the best of me. I've been doing a lot of thinking, trying to understand where those assumptions came from. It's hard to admit, but I see now that I was judging you without even knowing you. Henry's silence was heavy but not accusatory. He nodded slowly, then spoke, his voice rich with years of wisdom. Judging others is easy, son. It takes no effort, no thought. But understanding takes courage. Are you willing to find that courage? Green's eyes misted as he nodded. Yes, sir. I know it'll take time, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. For a moment, the room was quiet, each man lost in his thoughts. Henry leaned back, his voice softening. I accept your apology, Officer Green, but forgiveness isn't just about words. It's about action. If you truly want to make a difference, then start by listening, really listening to people. Green nodded, his expression resolute. I will, Mr. Sullivan. And thank you. I'll never forget this. The meeting ended, but something had shifted. For both men, it marked the beginning of a new journey. Henry returned to the park the next morning, feeling a renewed sense of peace. As he took his usual seat, he noticed familiar faces greeting him warmly, a quiet acknowledgement of the respect he had earned in the community. But the story didn't end there. Weeks later, the town organized a special event at Willow Park in Henry's honor, a celebration of his dedication to the community. Families gathered, children played, and even Officer Green showed up, mingling with the crowd, his face showing a hint of humility. At the height of the event, Chief Blake took the stage, gesturing for silence. Today, we're here to honor someone who has taught us all the true meaning of community. Mr. Henry Sullivan, your strength, kindness, and perseverance have shaped this neighborhood. You've shown us what it means to truly belong. The crowd erupted in applause, and Henry, touched beyond words, stood with a humble smile. As the applause quieted, he took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. Thank you, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This park, it's more than just trees and benches. It's a place where we all come together, where we find peace, where we see each other not as strangers, but as neighbors, as family. The crowd listened intently, some wiping away tears, others nodding in agreement. I've learned something important over the years, Henry continued, and that is this. Real change doesn't come from anger or resentment. It comes from understanding, from listening, and from forgiving. He paused, his gaze drifting to Officer Green, who stood quietly at the back, watching with deep respect. We're all here because we care, Henry said, his voice growing stronger. And if we can keep caring, keep showing up for each other, then we can make this community something truly special. As he stepped down, the crowd surged forward to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him how much he meant to them. Children clustered around him, their laughter and joy filling the air, while parents looked on with admiration. In the weeks that followed, Henry's influence continued to grow. Inspired by his story, the community launched new programs focused on unity and inclusion. Officer Green became an active participant, volunteering to mentor local teens and leading workshops on empathy and community building. He even invited Henry to one of the workshops, asking him to share his wisdom with the younger generation. Henry's legacy was not just in the park benches he had helped design or the trees he had planted. It was in the lives he touched, in the lessons he imparted, and in the enduring sense of community he had fostered. His story, once a quiet memory, had become a living force, guiding the people around him to embrace compassion, to choose understanding, and to find strength in unity. The park, once a backdrop to conflict, had become a beacon of hope, a place where the past met the future, and where people, no matter their background, could come together to build something beautiful. And yet, deep down, Henry felt that this was only the beginning. As autumn painted Willow Park in vibrant shades of amber and crimson, the story of Henry Sullivan continued to weave through the hearts of everyone who visited. His quiet presence on that well-worn bench had become a symbol of strength, wisdom, and resilience. With each passing day, more people began seeking him out, not just for advice, but to hear his stories, to find solace in his words, and sometimes simply to sit in silence beside him, feeling the warmth of his calm spirit. One particularly brisk morning, as Henry settled into his bench with a fresh cup of coffee, he noticed a group of teenagers gathered nearby, casting curious glances in his direction. Among them was a lanky boy named Jake, his wild hair peeking out from under a beanie. After a moment of hesitation, Jake approached with a mix of nervous energy and reluctant respect. "Hey, Mr. Sullivan," he started, shuffling his feet. "Mind if we sit here?" Henry gestured warmly to the space beside him. "Please, take a seat. The more the merrier." As the teens settled down, their faces a blend of curiosity and skepticism, Jake turned to Henry with a look of defiance mixed with vulnerability. "I heard you stood up to that cop who tried to kick you out of the park. That's pretty badass." Henry chuckled, a soft twinkle in his eye. "Now, Jake, standing up for yourself isn't about being badass. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. It's about knowing where you belong and holding on to that. Jake nodded, thoughtful. But how do you know when it's worth standing up? Like, what if it's too much, or no one cares? Henry took a deep breath, his gaze drifting across the park. You know, Jake, when I was about your age, I thought changing the world was like a thunderstorm. Loud, powerful, impossible to ignore. But real change, I've learned, is more like planting seeds. It's quiet, it's patient, and it takes time. Sometimes you won't see the results right away, but you keep planting anyway. One of the other teens, a girl named Mia with bright blue hair, leaned forward, intrigued. What do you mean, planting seeds? Henry smiled, recalling decades of experiences and sacrifices. It means that every kind action, every word of kindness, and every time you stand up for what's right, even in the smallest ways, you're planting seeds for the future. You may not see them grow right away, but they're there. And one day, they'll bloom into something beautiful. The teens sat quietly, each of them absorbing his words in their own way. The quiet moment was unexpectedly interrupted by laughter from a nearby group of parkgoers, breaking the silence with a light-hearted reminder of life's simple joys. Jake looked over, noticing Officer Green among the group, this time without his usual authority-laden demeanor. He was laughing, surrounded by young children who were tugging at his hands, urging him to join their game of tag. Jake frowned, glancing back at Henry. Wait, isn't that? Yes, Henry replied, his voice even, as if reading Jake's thoughts. That's Officer Green. He's here every week now, helping with youth programs. Jake's eyes narrowed. And you're just okay with that? After what he did? Henry paused, choosing his words carefully. Forgiving someone doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means giving them a chance to be better. Officer Green has a long road ahead of him, but he's here because he wants to make things right. Sometimes, giving people a chance to change is just as powerful as standing up to them. Jake looked at Henry, a mixture of admiration and disbelief on his face. I don't know if I could do that. Feels too nice, too forgiving. Henry let out a soft laugh, warm but tinged with the weight of years. Forgiving isn't easy, Jake. It's one of the hardest things you can do, but it's worth it if it helps build something stronger. He paused, his gaze settling on Officer Green in the distance. Besides, sometimes people surprise you. Just then, a familiar voice called out, breaking the moment. Mr. Sullivan. Henry turned to see Chief Blake approaching, a slight grin on his face as he waved. Behind him trailed Leah, pushing her toddler in a stroller, and a few other familiar faces from the community. The group had grown accustomed to gathering near Henry's bench, drawn by his presence like moths to a flame. Good morning, Chief, Henry greeted him, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. You're quite the regular here now. Chief Blake laughed, nodding. Well, Henry, you've managed to turn this park into the unofficial community hub. I couldn't miss out on the best part of the neighborhood. Leah stepped forward, her son babbling happily in the stroller. Mr. Sullivan, we were just talking about the new community center project. It's happening. They're going to break ground next month, and they want you to be there for the ceremony. Henry's eyes widened in pleasant surprise. A new community center, huh? Well, I'd be honored. This neighborhood could certainly use a place where folks can gather year-round, rain or shine. Just then, Jake, emboldened by the friendly atmosphere, leaned forward. Hey, Mr. Sullivan, you should tell everyone about that time you stood up to that officer. The story of how you turned this place around. It's kinda epic. Henry chuckled, casting a playful glance at Chief Blake. Oh, I don't know if I'd call it epic, Jake, but there's a lesson in that day, all right? He turned back to the group, his voice softening, but with an edge of humor. Sometimes you just have to remind people who's boss, even if you're just an old man with a cane and a newspaper. The group burst into laughter, the sound echoing through the park. Chief Blake shook his head, amused. Henry, you may not realize it, but you've got half the town quoting you these days. My officers keep saying, what would Henry do? Every time they find themselves in a tough spot. Henry chuckled, shaking his head. Well, as long as they're thinking before they act, I suppose I'm doing my job. He paused, looking at each person gathered around him, his eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of pride. But remember, it's not just me. It's each of you. It's what we do together that keeps this place strong. In that moment, Officer Green, having finished his game of tag with the children, approached the group, his face flushed with exertion but alight with newfound purpose. He nodded at Henry, a silent gesture of respect, and turned to the group. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice steady yet filled with sincerity, "I was hoping to ask you something. Would you be willing to help me lead a workshop for the new officers next month? I think they could really benefit from hearing your perspective." The suggestion drew murmurs of approval from the group, and Henry's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Well now, Green, I'm not sure what those rookies would think of a retired old man giving them lessons, but if it'll help them understand this community better, I'd be glad to." Green grinned, clearly relieved. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I know it would mean a lot to them, and to me." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the faces of the gathered crowd, Henry felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. It was a warmth that went beyond the friendships, beyond the respect he had earned. It was the warmth of a community that had, in many ways, become a family. In the days that followed, preparations for the community center's groundbreaking ceremony went into full swing, and the excitement in the neighborhood grew. Henry was invited to every meeting, every planning session, and although he often joked about being just an old man, everyone knew that his insight and wisdom were invaluable. When the day of the ceremony finally arrived, the park was packed with families, teens, city officials, and even a few people from the neighboring towns who had heard about Henry's story. The ceremony began with speeches from the mayor, Chief Blake, and other local leaders, each of whom spoke about the park, the new community center, and the importance of unity. But it was Henry who drew the loudest cheers when he took the stage. His voice, though older, held a strength that resonated with everyone there. "Thank you, everyone," he began, looking out at the crowd with pride. "This park has been my home for decades. I've watched it grow and change, just as I've seen each of you grow and change. And today, standing here with all of you, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I feel hope." The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. This new community center isn't just a building. It's a promise that we'll continue to build something strong, something that will last. We'll keep planting seeds, keep tending to them, and keep helping them grow. He paused, his gaze shifting to Officer Green and the teens in the audience, his voice warm with encouragement. "And remember, this is just the beginning. You each have a part to play. It's up to all of us to keep this place thriving, to look out for each other, and to make sure everyone feels they belong." When he finished, the applause was thunderous, echoing through the park like a heartbeat of unity. In the weeks that followed, the construction of the community center began, with volunteers coming together to help where they could. The youth workshops, co-led by Henry and Officer Green, became a regular occurrence, each session packed with new officers eager to learn. And every day, Henry continued to visit his bench, watching with quiet pride as his vision blossomed into something far greater than he had ever imagined. But even then, deep in his heart, Henry knew that there were more seeds to plant, more lives to touch, and more stories to tell. As winter settled over Willow Park, blanketing the trees in a light dusting of frost, the sense of community and warmth around Henry only seemed to grow stronger. The park had become more than just a gathering place. It was a sanctuary for people to come together, to share stories, to bridge divides. Henry's bench remained a focal point, a kind of unofficial headquarters where people gathered to discuss everything from life's small joys to the challenges facing their community. One brisk afternoon, Henry noticed a familiar face approaching him through the misty air. It was Tyler, a quiet young man who usually kept to himself, rarely speaking up during the gatherings. Today, though, Tyler's steps had purpose, and there was a look of determination in his eyes. He stood before Henry, shuffling nervously, before finally speaking. "Mr. Sullivan, can I talk to you about something? It's kind of personal." Henry's warm smile put Tyler at ease. "Of course, Tyler. Have a seat." Tyler sat down, fumbling with his hands as he searched for the right words. "I've been struggling, feeling like I don't belong here. I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life, but sometimes it feels like I'm invisible, like I don't really matter." Henry's gaze softened, a gentle understanding filling his eyes. Tyler, I've felt that way more times than I can count. But you know, the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. Tyler looked at him. His curiosity piqued. What's that? That sometimes belonging isn't about waiting for someone to make room for you. It's about carving out your own place, making sure you're seen, heard, and valued. It's about showing up for yourself and others. Tyler took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been wanting to volunteer for the new community center, to help with the youth programs. I just didn't think anyone would want me there. Henry placed a reassuring hand on Tyler's shoulder. We'd be lucky to have you, Tyler, and the young folks at the center could learn a lot from someone like you. Don't wait for someone to give you permission to belong. Step into it, own it. This community is as much yours as it is anyone else's. As Tyler left, his steps lighter and his face brighter, Henry felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that encouraging others, lifting them up, was the real heart of his work. The days that followed were filled with preparations for a grand winter celebration at the park, an event that had become an annual tradition. People from all walks of life came together to decorate the park with strings of lights, wreaths, and handmade ornaments. Even Officer Green, now a familiar and welcome face in the community, joined in, laughing as he helped the children hang ornaments on the trees. The night of the celebration arrived, and the park was a winter wonderland, glowing with warm lights that danced off the frost-covered branches. The townsfolk gathered around a small stage, where Chief Blake prepared to give a short speech, the crowd buzzing with excitement. But just as the chief raised his hand for silence, he looked over at Henry, who stood off to the side with a bemused smile and grinned. Actually, Chief Blake announced, I think our guest of honor tonight should be Mr. Henry Sullivan. The crowd erupted in applause, and Henry, caught off guard, chuckled as he made his way to the stage. Thank you, he began, his voice carrying warmth and humor. I didn't expect to be speaking tonight, but I'll do my best to make it quick. After all, I know everyone's here for the hot cocoa and cookies. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Henry's gaze softened as he looked out at the familiar faces before him. This park has been my home for many years, he continued, his voice growing serious. And I've watched each of you bring it to life in ways I never imagined. It's not the trees, or the paths, or even the new community center that make this place special. It's you. All of you. Each person here brings their own story, their own hopes, and their own dreams. Together, we've created something bigger than any one of us. The crowd fell silent, captivated by his words. People often ask me how I keep going, how I keep showing up day after day, and my answer is simple. I show up because of you. Because every time I see you here, working together, building something beautiful, I know that our community is worth fighting for. Just then, a light snow began to fall, the flakes drifting down in a soft flurry that added a magical touch to the scene. Henry chuckled, lifting his hand to catch a snowflake on his fingertip. Seems even the heavens agree, he said with a smile, drawing a soft chuckle from the crowd. But remember, my friends, this is only the beginning. There's more work to be done, more people to welcome, and more dreams to build. And as long as we keep showing up for each other, I know we'll be all right. The crowd burst into applause, and Henry stepped down, feeling the warmth of their gratitude wash over him. As he walked through the crowd, people stopped him to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him how much he had inspired them. Amidst the gathering, Henry spotted Leah, who waved him over with a smile. Her toddler, now old enough to walk, toddled over to Henry, grabbing his hand with a grin. Mr. Sullivan, Lee said, her voice soft, I wanted to tell you something. You remember when I told you I was worried about my son growing up in this world? Well, you've given me hope. You've shown me that as long as we keep trying, keep building, we can create a place where he'll feel safe and loved. Thank you, truly. Henry felt a lump rise in his throat, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Lee, and remember, this community belongs to him too. We're just setting the stage. It's his generation that will carry it forward. As the night wore on, Henry noticed Tyler, the shy young man, helping to serve cocoa to the children, his face lit with a quiet joy. He also caught sight of Officer Green, chatting with a group of teenagers, listening intently as they shared their ideas for the community center. Everywhere he looked, he saw people connecting, sharing, and finding purpose. It was everything he had dreamed of, and more. But just as Henry thought the night couldn't get any better, Chief Blake approached him with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Henry, I've got one last surprise for you." "Oh? And what might that be, Chief?" Henry asked, amused. With a grin, Chief Blake gestured to a newly unveiled plaque mounted beside Henry's favorite bench. The inscription read, "In honor of Henry Sullivan, a man of quiet strength, a builder of dreams, and a friend to all." Henry stared at the plaque, his heart swelling with a mix of surprise and gratitude. The crowd gathered around, clapping and cheering, as Henry tried to find the words. Finally, he managed a soft, choked laugh. "You know, I don't do all this for plaques," he said, his voice wavering. "But I have to admit, this one means a lot." The evening ended with laughter, stories, and a shared feeling of unity that lingered long after the festivities had ended. For Henry, it was a moment he would carry in his heart forever, a reminder that he had not only made a difference, but had become part of something greater than himself. As the final stragglers left the park and the lights dimmed, Henry sat on his bench, gazing up at the stars that twinkled above. The park was quiet, serene, the kind of silence that brought peace, and for the first time he felt truly at home, not just in the park, but in the hearts of those who had come to know him, to respect him, and to carry on his legacy. But Henry knew that the story wasn't over. There would be new challenges, new people to welcome, and new stories to create. He was ready, as he had always been, to keep showing up, to keep planting seeds, and to keep building the future, one quiet moment at a time. As spring breathed new life into Willow Park, Henry continued his daily visits to his bench, observing the transformation around him. The newly sprouting flowers mirrored the renewal he saw in his community. Kids played freely, teens gathered to chat, and families picnicked under the blossoming trees. It was a testament to the unity and hope that had grown out of their collective efforts. Yet, with every peaceful day, Henry sensed an undercurrent, a quiet, building tension, that something was about to disrupt this fragile harmony. One afternoon, as Henry sat watching a group of children chase each other, Leah hurried up to him, her face clouded with worry. She held a letter in her hand, which she quickly extended toward him. "Mr. Sullivan, I didn't know who else to turn to," she said, her voice trembling. "It's from the city council. They're planning to approve a new development project right here. They want to replace part of the park with high-rise condos." Henry's eyes darkened as he scanned the letter, his heart sinking at the thought of losing the park, their sanctuary, their gathering place, to yet another development. "This can't be right," Henry muttered, more to himself than to Leah. "This park means so much to everyone here. They can't just take it away." Lee nodded, her gaze fixed on Henry. "We have to do something. This place it's a part of us." Henry felt the weight of her words. He knew that for the community, Willow Park was more than just land. It was a symbol of unity, of belonging, and of the countless memories they had built together. Determined, he stood up, his eyes filled with a familiar fire. "Then we'll make sure they hear us," Henry declared, his voice resolute. "We'll gather everyone, and we'll fight to keep this place. They'll have to understand that this isn't just any piece of land, it's our home." Leah's face brightened with hope. She quickly set to work spreading the word, while Henry contacted Chief Blake and a few others who had been by his side since the early days. Within hours, a meeting was organized in the park, and people poured in, their faces lined with determination, frustration, and resolve. Henry's bench became the makeshift stage, and he stood atop it, a symbol of the collective strength they had built. When the crowd had settled, Henry began to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of gravity and hope. "Everyone here knows what this park means to us," he began, his gaze sweeping over familiar and unfamiliar faces alike. "We've come together in this place. We've shared our stories, our hopes, our struggles. Willow Park isn't just a spot on a map. It's our heart, our sanctuary, and I know you all feel the same way." Nods and murmurs of agreement echoed through the crowd. The young, the old, families, friends, everyone was united in their resolve. "We can't let them take this from us," Henry continued, his voice rising. "But if we want to save it, we need to be clear, organized, and relentless. They may have power, but we have something they don't. We have each other, and we have the will to protect what we love." A round of applause erupted, people cheering as the energy in the park surged. Henry smiled, encouraged by the strength around him. Beside him, Chief Blake took the opportunity to step forward. "We'll need to organize rallies, gather petitions, and make our voices heard at the council meetings," Chief Blake advised. "And I'm here to help make sure every step we take is lawful and impactful." The next days were a whirlwind of activity. Posters went up, petitions circulated, and neighbors knocked on doors, gathering signatures and spreading the word. Tyler, the once quiet young man Henry had encouraged to volunteer, took on the role of rally organizer, his confidence growing with each step. Even Officer Green joined the movement, speaking passionately about the importance of preserving the park for future generations. As the date of the city council meeting approached, the community's anticipation grew. It was a powerful moment of unity, but beneath it all, there was a nervous tension. They knew the fight wouldn't be easy. They were up against powerful developers with deep pockets and political influence. But they had something that money couldn't buy: a shared love for their community and an unbreakable bond. Finally, the day of the council meeting arrived. A long line of people, led by Henry, filed into the council chamber, their faces a mix of determination and hope. The room was packed, overflowing with people who had come to stand up for Willow Park. Henry took his seat in the front row, his heart pounding with a mixture of pride and nerves. As he looked around, he saw familiar faces: Leah, Tyler, Chief Blake, Officer Green, each one a reminder of the community's resilience. The council members called for the meeting to start, and the room quieted as the lead councilman, a man with a stoic expression, introduced the development proposal. His tone was polished, professional, but it lacked the understanding and empathy that the community had come to expect from their leaders. When it was finally time for public comments, Henry stood and approached the microphone, his back straight and his eyes unyielding. The room hushed and all eyes turned to him. "Good evening, council members," he began, his voice calm yet resolute. "I'm Henry Sullivan. I've lived in this neighborhood for more than 40 years. And I'm here today to remind you of something that goes beyond numbers and profit margins." The councilman shifted in his seat, but Henry continued, undeterred. "Willow Park isn't just green space to us. It's our gathering place, our refuge. For years, this park has been a place where people from all walks of life come together. It's a place where stories are shared, where friendships are made, where our children grow up knowing they have a safe and welcoming space. And with every meeting, every event, every simple moment spent in this park, we've woven our lives into it." Henry's voice grew stronger, his passion filling the room. "When we talk about development, we can't ignore the people who live here, who've built their lives around this park. This isn't just a piece of land, it's a part of who we are, and taking it away would be taking away a part of our identity." Applause erupted, and council members exchanged glances, surprised by the intensity of the response. But Henry wasn't finished. He looked directly at each council member, his gaze unwavering. "We're not asking for much," he said, his tone steady but forceful. "We're asking you to recognize the heart of this community, to see us as more than numbers on a spreadsheet, and to understand that some things are worth protecting, not for profit, but for the people who call this place home." As Henry stepped back, Tyler and others from the community took their turn at the microphone, each one sharing personal stories of what Willow Park meant to them. By the end of the meeting, the room was filled with emotion, and even some of the council members seemed visibly moved. Days passed without an answer, and the waiting weighed heavily on everyone. But the community didn't let up. They continued gathering, planning rallies, making sure their voices remained strong. And every day, Henry kept his vigil at the park, sitting on his bench, watching over the place he had come to love as much as any home he had ever known. Then, one evening, the news finally arrived. The city council had decided Willow Park would remain untouched. The development would be moved to another location, preserving the park and its legacy. The news spread like wildfire, and by the time Henry returned to the park the next morning, a crowd had already gathered, cheering, hugging, and celebrating their hard-won victory. Henry stood at the center, overcome with pride and joy, feeling the depth of their unity, of their collective power. But as he looked out over the crowd, he noticed Tyler, Lee, Officer Green, and Chief Blake approaching him, each with a small smile. Tyler spoke first, his voice filled with admiration. "Mr. Sullivan, you are the heart of this fight. We wouldn't have done it without you." Henry's eyes shimmered with emotion. "No, Tyler. We did this together. Every single one of you made this happen. This park, it belongs to all of us." A cheer rose up from the crowd, and Henry's heart swelled with gratitude. He realized that this moment, this triumph, was more than a victory for the park. It was a testament to the strength of a community that had stood together, unyielding, for something they believed in. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the trees and pathways that they had fought so hard to protect, Henry felt a quiet peace settle over him. Willow Park would remain a place for stories, for laughter, for unity. And as long as he had breath in his body, he would keep showing up, keep planting seeds, and keep protecting the spirit of the community he had come to love so deeply. But Henry knew, with a smile that held both wisdom and a touch of mischief, that there were still many more stories left to tell. As summer approached, Willow Park pulsed with life. Every inch of its paths and benches filled with people who had come to celebrate and enjoy the sanctuary they had fought so hard to protect. Each face carried a sense of pride and belonging, and Henry felt it too, a swelling joy that came from knowing that he and his neighbors had stood together and triumphed. But just as life settled into this new rhythm, a letter arrived in Henry's mailbox, sparking a mix of curiosity and caution. The return address read, Department of Urban Planning, and Henry immediately knew that this wasn't the usual neighborhood notice or council update. Carefully, he opened the envelope, his fingers tracing over the words as he read, "Mr. Sullivan, the city invites you to lead the Community Legacy Initiative, a project designed to protect historic and significant sites within the city and foster community pride. We believe your work with Willow Park has uniquely qualified you for this role. Enclosed is an invitation to meet with our team to discuss your vision for the program. We look forward to working with you." Henry's heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and excitement. This was an opportunity to preserve more than just Willow Park. It was a chance to save places that held stories, memories, and meaning for generations. But it was also a heavy responsibility, one that he hadn't been expecting. Later that day, he found himself at his favorite bench in the park, the letter clutched in his hand as he looked out over the familiar trees and playgrounds. As if sensing his contemplation, Chief Blake approached, a knowing smile on his face. "I see you got the letter," the chief said, nodding at the paper Henry held. Henry glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, seems they think I'm some sort of community hero or something." Chief Blake chuckled. "Well, you're definitely something, Henry. You've done more for this place than any official has in decades. This is just the beginning. Imagine what you could do for the rest of the city." Henry sighed, though a hint of a sparkle danced in his eyes. "It's a wonderful opportunity, but I'm no city planner, Marcus. I'm just a man who loves his community. All I ever wanted was to make sure that Willow Park was safe, that people had a place to come together." The chief gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this job. They don't need another official with a clipboard. They need someone who understands what it's like to fight for something meaningful." Encouraged by Chief Blake's words, Henry decided to attend the meeting. The day he walked into City Hall, he was met by a room full of planners, architects, and community leaders, each of them turning to see the man whose stand for Willow Park had sparked a citywide movement. The conversation started politely, but soon Henry's passion began to shine through. He spoke about the importance of parks, libraries, and community centers, spaces that weren't just buildings, but were the lifeblood of neighborhoods, places where people felt rooted and connected. As he finished, the lead planner, a young woman named Sophia, leaned forward, her face alight with admiration. "Mr. Sullivan, your insights are exactly what we've been missing. You see beyond just structures. You see the soul of these places. We'd love for you to spearhead the initiative." Henry nodded, his voice calm yet resolute. "I'll do it, but only if we make sure this is more than just a symbolic program. I want the community involved. I want people to have a say, to feel they're part of something bigger." Sophia's smile widened. "That's exactly what we were hoping for. Let's make this a movement, one that honors the past while building a future everyone can take pride in." With Henry at the helm, the Community Legacy Initiative took shape swiftly. Each week, he met with residents from neighborhoods across the city, listening to stories about beloved corner shops, mural-adorned alleyways, and old libraries where people had learned, dreamed, and connected. Each tale added another layer of depth to the project. And soon it was clear that preserving these places was about more than just nostalgia. It was about keeping the city's heart alive. One afternoon, as Henry was hosting a gathering in Willow Park to discuss the initiative, Tyler approached him, his face alight with excitement. "Mr. Sullivan, I was wondering, do you think we could start a youth mentorship program as part of the initiative?" Tyler asked, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "I think it would be great to have young people learning about the history of these places, helping out with events, and even leading some projects." Henry's eyes sparkled with approval. "I think that's a brilliant idea, Tyler. You'd be surprised at how much wisdom can come from learning about the past. And the youth can bring fresh ideas too, keep things vibrant and relevant." Within weeks, the youth mentorship program became one of the most popular aspects of the initiative. Young volunteers from schools around the city signed up, excited to work alongside Henry and the other community leaders. Each new story they uncovered, each mural they helped preserve, and each neighborhood they explored left a profound impact on them, building a sense of pride and responsibility. Meanwhile, as the initiative continued to thrive, the community around Willow Park began to notice changes in the young officers at the local precinct, too. Officer Green, in particular, had become a mentor himself, guiding new recruits on the importance of building trust within the neighborhoods. He often shared stories of his experience with Henry, reminding the rookies that their role wasn't just about enforcing the law, but about serving with respect and compassion. One day, as Officer Green and Henry crossed paths near the community center, Green approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Sullivan, I have a confession," Green said, a faint smile on his face. "When I first started on this path, I thought of people as, well, suspects or citizens. I never really understood what it meant to be part of a community. But you've changed that for me, and now I see things differently. I want to thank you." Henry chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Well, Green, I suppose it's true what they say. You can teach an old dog new tricks." They both laughed, a sense of camaraderie shared between them that once seemed impossible. As the initiative moved forward, Henry became a local icon, his impact stretching beyond his neighborhood to inspire the entire city. Stories about his work began appearing in local newspapers and on community blogs, and soon, people from neighboring towns were visiting Willow Park, eager to meet the man whose passion had revitalized an entire community. Then, one evening, as Henry was preparing to leave the park, he spotted a familiar figure waiting near his bench. It was Sophia, the young planner from the city, her face alight with excitement. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, barely containing her enthusiasm, "I have some news. We've just received funding for a new project, and we want to name it after you. The Henry Sullivan Community Center. It will serve as a hub for all the projects you've started, from the Legacy Initiative to youth mentorship and community gatherings. It's a way to honor everything you've done." Henry's eyes widened in disbelief, his breath catching. "A center, in my name?" He paused, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say, Sophia. I never expected any of this." Sophia's face softened with admiration. "You've earned it, Henry. You've given this city more than buildings or projects. You've given us hope, unity, and a sense of belonging. This is our way of saying thank you." When the day of the dedication ceremony arrived, people filled the streets leading to the new community center. Old friends, young volunteers, city officials, and families from all over gathered to celebrate the momentous occasion. As Henry approached the podium, the crowd fell silent, each person eagerly awaiting his words. "Thank you all," he began, his voice wavering slightly with emotion. "This center, this place, it belongs to each of you. I may have helped start the journey, but it's your love, your dedication, and your spirit that brought us here. This city, our neighborhoods, our parks, and our community spaces, They're reflections of our hearts. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. If I've learned anything, it's that we are stronger together. Our stories, our memories, our shared dreams, they are what make these places come alive. And now, with this center, we have a place where our community can continue to grow, to learn, and to connect. Applause erupted, and Henry stood at the podium, his heart full, as the people he had come to love so dearly cheered in celebration. In that moment, he knew that every step, every struggle, and every story he had shared had led to something beautiful, something lasting. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Henry stayed behind, gazing at the new building, a symbol of the countless memories, dreams, and hopes that would live within its walls. But even as he stood there, a familiar thought stirred within him. This wasn't the end. The journey wasn't over. For as long as there were stories to tell, people to encourage, and dreams to protect, Henry knew he would be there, ready to keep building a legacy of compassion, unity, and resilience. As summer turned to autumn, the newly named Henry Sullivan Community Center became a bustling hub of activity. Each day, residents poured in to attend workshops, organize events, and simply connect with neighbors. It was a beacon of unity and a testament to the resilience of the community. Yet, amid the laughter and shared stories, Henry noticed something quietly brewing that both puzzled and intrigued him. One morning, as he was greeting some early visitors to the center, Tyler hurried over, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Sullivan, you need to see this. There's a new mural going up on the east wall. The artist's name is Camila, and she's just incredible. She said she was inspired by your story and the fight for the park." Henry followed Tyler outside, his curiosity piqued. As they rounded the corner of the center, Henry stopped in his tracks, his breath catching as he took in the sight before him. The mural spanned nearly the entire wall, a vibrant tapestry that depicted Willow Park, the people who frequented it, and even Henry himself sitting on his beloved bench. The details were breathtaking, capturing the spirit of the community with striking color and warmth. Camila, a young artist with paint-splattered clothes and a shy smile, stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan," she said softly, "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to create something that would remind everyone of the strength and unity that you've inspired. This mural, it's for you and for everyone who fought for this place." Henry felt a lump rise in his throat as he studied the mural, his eyes lingering on each detail. "Camila, it's beautiful. More than that, it's a reminder of everything we've built together. Thank you." Camila blushed, her eyes bright. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Your story gave me hope. I've been through a lot myself, and knowing what you did, well, it helped me believe that I could make a difference too." Henry reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You already have, Camila. Art like this brings people together, helps them remember what matters. Never underestimate the power of what you're creating." As the mural neared completion, it drew crowds from across the city. People of all ages came to admire the artwork, many of them pausing to take photos, to share stories about the park, or to simply stand in quiet reflection. The mural became a symbol of both the struggles and triumphs of the community, a colorful tribute to the spirit that had kept them united. One evening, as the sun set over the mural, casting a warm glow on its vibrant colors, Chief Blake and Officer Green arrived at the community center, a sense of purpose evident in their expressions. They found Henry standing in front of the mural, lost in thought, and approached him with a friendly nod. "Henry," Chief Blake began, "we've been talking, and we think it's time to expand the outreach we started here in the park. The community center is thriving, but there are still neighborhoods in the city that need help, places where people feel forgotten. We'd like to ask for your help." Henry turned to them, listening intently. "Go on," he said, intrigued. Officer Green took a step forward. "We want to launch a citywide initiative, a series of community forums where people can speak openly about the issues they face. It would be a place where officers and residents can listen to each other, build understanding, and find solutions together. We're calling it the Bridge Builders Program, and we want you to be a part of it." Henry's eyes lit up, a mix of surprise and pride in his expression. "That's an ambitious idea," he said thoughtfully. "But it's exactly what we need. Too often, people feel like they're not being heard. A program like this could help rebuild trust, especially in places where people feel disconnected from those in charge. Chief Blake nodded, his voice filled with determination. "We couldn't think of anyone better to help lead this, Henry. You've shown us how powerful it is to bring people together, and we believe this program could change lives, just like Willow Park has." The first forum was scheduled for the following month, and as the date approached, Henry threw himself into preparations. He reached out to community leaders, educators, activists, and even local artists like Camila, who could offer unique perspectives. The response was overwhelming. People from every neighborhood expressed a desire to participate, eager for a chance to share their voices and make a difference. The night of the first forum was electric with anticipation. Held in the spacious main hall of the community center, the forum attracted people of all backgrounds, ages, and perspectives. There was an air of both excitement and uncertainty as everyone settled in, wondering what to expect. Henry stood at the front of the room, flanked by Chief Blake, Officer Green, and a few other community leaders. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention, and began to speak, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This forum isn't just a meeting, it's an opportunity to listen, to understand, and to bridge the gaps that have too often kept us apart. We may not solve every problem tonight, but together we can start to make a difference. Each of you has a story, a voice, and tonight we want to hear it." As people began to speak, the stories that emerged were raw, powerful, and often heartbreaking. A young mother shared her fears about raising her children in a neighborhood plagued by violence. An elderly man spoke of the loneliness he felt after his wife passed, feeling forgotten by the city he had lived in all his life. A high school student shared his struggles with discrimination, his voice trembling as he described the ways he had been treated unfairly. Through it all, Henry listened with deep compassion, often interjecting with words of encouragement or thoughtful questions. The officers in attendance, many of whom had come with preconceived notions, were visibly moved by the courage and vulnerability of the residents. One by one, people began to open up, building bridges of empathy and understanding. As the forum drew to a close, a sense of unity filled the room, and Henry knew that something profound had taken place. It wasn't just a meeting, it was the beginning of a transformation. In the weeks that followed, the Bridge Builders program expanded with forums held in every district of the city. Each meeting brought new voices, new perspectives, and new insights, and soon, a remarkable change began to take shape. Policies were revised, resources were allocated to underserved areas, and residents started to feel a renewed sense of hope and pride in their city. Henry was tireless in his efforts, attending every forum, meeting with residents, and working closely with city officials. His dedication inspired others, and soon, people from all walks of life were stepping up to volunteer, eager to be part of the movement he had helped spark. Even those who had once been skeptical found themselves moved by the power of collective action. But just as the program gained momentum, an unexpected challenge arose. A series of budget cuts threatened to end the initiative, leaving many of the city's most vulnerable communities at risk of being overlooked once again. The news hit the community hard, and Henry felt the weight of their disappointment. Yet, rather than give in, Henry called for a special gathering at the community center, determined to fight for the program they had all worked so hard to build. As people filled the hall, Henry took the stage, his eyes blazing with determination. "We're not giving up," he declared, his voice resonant with conviction. "This program has shown us what's possible when we come together, when we listen and support one another. And I'll be damned if we let a budget cut silence our voices." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Henry continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "If the city can't fund this, then we'll find another way. We'll fundraise, we'll organize, and we'll keep pushing until they have no choice but to see the value of what we've built." With renewed energy, the community launched a massive fundraising campaign, reaching out to local businesses, crowdfunding platforms, and anyone who would listen. Donations poured in, and soon, news of the Bridge Builders program spread far beyond the city. Media outlets picked up the story, and people from all over began contributing to the cause, inspired by Henry's unwavering commitment. In the end, they not only raised enough to keep the program going, but they also secured additional funding that allowed them to expand it even further. The city council, impressed by the community's resolve, reinstated their support, and the program became a permanent fixture, a shining example of what could be accomplished when people stood united. Henry, though exhausted, felt a deep sense of pride as he watched the program flourish. But more than that, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the people who had rallied around him, who had turned his vision into a movement that had changed lives. And as he stood outside the community center looking out at the bustling activity around him, he knew that this journey was far from over. There would always be more to fight for, more stories to share, more people to uplift. But Henry was ready, his heart filled with the knowledge that he wasn't alone. The community he loved stood beside him, each person ready to build, to grow, and to create a future that honored the past while embracing the promise of tomorrow. The Bridge Builders program continued to flourish, touching countless lives across the city. As the momentum grew, Henry found himself busier than ever, traveling to different neighborhoods, meeting new faces, and witnessing firsthand the power of unity. Yet, even as the program expanded and inspired many, Henry sensed that they were on the cusp of something even greater. A new chapter that would not only cement the impact they had already made, but also leave a lasting legacy for generations to come. One late autumn evening, as Henry prepared to leave the community center after a particularly lively forum, he noticed a young woman waiting outside. She had a hesitant look on her face, her eyes bright yet cautious. Henry recognized her from previous gatherings but realized they hadn't formally met. "Hello, Mr. Sullivan," she said softly, offering a tentative smile. "I'm Tasha. I've been attending the forums and I wanted to speak with you about an idea." Henry's face lit up with curiosity, and he gestured for her to walk with him. "I'm listening, Tasha. What's on your mind?" As they walked, Tasha's face grew animated, her words flowing faster with excitement. "I grew up here, in one of the neighborhoods that didn't have access to many resources. My family struggled, and it felt like we were forgotten by the city. But this program, it's given me a new sense of pride in my community, and I want to give back. I was thinking, what if we created a community mentorship program specifically for young adults? A place where people like me could learn skills, find mentors, and feel like they're a part of something meaningful." Henry's eyes sparkled as he listened, recognizing the same passion in Tasha that he had seen in himself so many years ago. "That's a powerful idea, Tasha," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "A mentorship program could be life-changing, especially for those who felt isolated or overlooked." Tasha nodded, her gaze steady. "And I think it would help bridge the gap between generations. People my age need role models, people who understand our struggles but can also help us find our way. And we need a space where we feel safe to dream, to make mistakes, and to grow." Henry felt a surge of pride, realizing how much the younger generation was ready to take up the mantle. "Then let's make it happen, Tasha. We'll need to plan, gather support, and reach out to mentors. But if we work together, I have no doubt we can create something remarkable." Over the next few weeks, Tasha's idea took shape. With Henry's guidance, they organized a series of workshops and gathered volunteers who were eager to share their expertise, from local business owners and artists to educators and city officials. The Community Mentorship Program became known as Future Builders, a fitting name that reflected both the spirit of the initiative and the dreams of the young people it served. As Future Builders gained traction, it quickly became one of the most popular programs at the community center. Young adults from all corners of the city flocked to the workshops, eager to learn everything from financial literacy and job skills to creative arts and community leadership. Henry watched with a deep sense of fulfillment as each session brought more energy, more connection, and more hope. One day, Tasha approached him with a look of nervous excitement. "Mr. Sullivan, we've been getting attention from local news outlets. They want to do a feature on Future Builders and the Bridge Builders program. Would you be willing to give an interview?" Henry chuckled, a bit amused by the attention. "Well, I suppose I can handle a few questions." though I'm more interested in hearing from you and the others. This program is as much yours as it is mine." A week later, a reporter and cameraman arrived at the community center. They spent the day interviewing mentors, mentees, and community leaders, capturing the essence of what the programs had brought to the city. When it was Henry's turn, he spoke with a calm humility, focusing not on his own efforts, but on the power of the collective, of people coming together to make a difference. "Community isn't just about a place," he said, his voice steady and warm. "It's about people. About creating connections, sharing our experiences, and building something greater than ourselves. What we've done here isn't just a program, it's a movement, one that reminds us all of what's possible when we care enough to act." The news segment aired a few days later, and the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up in record numbers, and people from neighboring towns reached out, eager to start similar initiatives in their own communities. The Bridge Builders and Future Builders programs had sparked something powerful, something that was now reaching far beyond the city's borders. But amid the success, Henry faced an unexpected challenge. One evening, as he was going over plans for an upcoming Future Builders event, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, intense enough to make him stop in his tracks. He sank into his chair, clutching his chest, trying to catch his breath. For a moment, fear washed over him, a stark reminder of his age and the toll his work had taken on him. Lay, who had been nearby organizing materials, noticed his distress and rushed over. "Henry, are you all right?" He managed a faint smile, waving off her concern. "Just overdid it a bit, I think. I'll be fine." But Leah wasn't convinced. She gently but firmly insisted that he see a doctor, and after some persuasion, Henry agreed. The diagnosis was sobering. His heart, though strong in spirit, was showing signs of wear. The doctor advised him to slow down, to consider stepping back from his duties and letting others carry on his legacy. The news weighed heavily on Henry, and for the first time, he felt a pang of vulnerability. Could he really step back? Could he entrust the programs to others and trust that they would carry forward the vision he had nurtured? Days turned into weeks as Henry wrestled with his decision. He continued to attend meetings and events, but there was a noticeable shift in his presence, a quiet contemplation that hadn't been there before. Sensing his hesitation, Chief Blake and Tasha decided to arrange a gathering, bringing together the core members of both programs. They wanted to show Henry that, regardless of his role, his legacy would remain alive and thriving. When Henry arrived at the community center, he was greeted by dozens of familiar faces, each one reflecting gratitude and admiration. Tasha stepped forward, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Mr. Sullivan, we know you've been advised to take it easy, to let others help shoulder the work. And we want you to know, we're ready. You've taught us, guided us, and inspired us, and now we're prepared to continue what you started." One by one, people stood up to share what the programs had meant to them. A young woman spoke about how Future Builders had helped her gain confidence and land her first job. An elderly man thanked Henry for helping him find community after years of loneliness. Even Officer Green shared a heartfelt story of how the Bridge Builders program had transformed his outlook on life and his approach to his work. By the time everyone had spoken, Henry's eyes were misted with tears. He looked around the room, overwhelmed by the love and support, by the realization that his work had touched so many lives in ways he had never imagined. Finally, he stood, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and humility. "Thank you, each and every one of you. You've given me more than I could ever ask for. This is more than I dreamed, and I know now that I can trust you all to carry this forward, to keep building and growing, just as we always have." The room erupted in applause, people rising to their feet, clapping and cheering for the man who had given them not just a program, but a sense of purpose and belonging. And in that moment, Henry felt a profound peace settle over him, a knowledge that his legacy was in good hands, that he had planted seeds that would continue to bloom long after he was gone. In the weeks that followed, Henry began to step back, allowing Tasha, Tyler, Chief Blake, and others to take on more responsibility. He still visited the community center regularly, sitting on his favorite bench and offering advice whenever asked, But he found a new joy in watching others lead, in seeing the programs flourish without him at the helm. The city continued to transform, each neighborhood finding its own version of community and connection, inspired by the legacy Henry had left behind. And though his role had changed, Henry remained as much a part of Willow Park as the trees, the pathways, and the laughter that echoed through the air. He had given his heart to this place, and in return, the community carried his spirit forward, a reminder that together they could build a world filled with hope, compassion, and endless possibility. As the seasons changed, the Henry Sullivan Community Center became a thriving symbol of everything Henry and his neighbors had worked for. People of all ages came together to learn, share, and find a place of belonging. Every corner of the center was alive with laughter, stories, and new friendships forming. But amid this energy, Henry sensed an underlying tension. Rumors of a new development plan threatening other neighborhoods had begun to circulate, and they weighed heavily on his mind. One evening, as Henry sat on his bench watching the sunset over Willow Park, he was joined by Tasha and Chief Blake. Both looked troubled, and it was clear they had something urgent to share. "Henry," Chief Blake began, his face grim. "The city's received an aggressive bid from a private developer. They're planning to buy up properties across the city, starting in neighborhoods that are underfunded and undervalued. It's all moving fast, and there's a lot of money behind it. If we don't act, those communities will be dismantled." Tasha nodded, her face filled with determination. "They're targeting historic sites, parks, community centers, places just like ours. They see dollar signs, not people, and they're pushing hard to get city approval." Henry felt a familiar fire ignite within him. He had fought too hard for Willow Park and the community center to watch it all be swept away by corporate greed. "We can't let that happen," he said, his voice steady yet fierce. "These places, they're the lifeblood of our neighborhoods. If we let them take these places from us, we lose everything we've built together." Chief Blake placed a reassuring hand on Henry's shoulder. "You've already inspired so many, Henry. If anyone can rally people to stand up against this, it's you." Tasha's eyes sparkled with a newfound courage. "This is our chance to expand bridge builders, to bring people from all over the city together. Imagine what we could accomplish if we unite every neighborhood in this fight. We could show these developers that our community is stronger than their money." Henry nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face as he looked from Tasha to Chief Blake. "Then let's do it, but this time it's not just Willow Park. It's every park, every community center, every block that people call home. We'll need everyone on board, young and old, newcomers and lifelong residents alike." They spent the next week organizing the first citywide community summit. It was held at the Henry Sullivan Community Center, and people from all over the city filled the rooms, spilling out into the park. There were old friends, new faces, and even local media curious to see the movement in action. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a sense of urgency and purpose. As the summit began, Henry took the stage, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and resolve. The faces before him reflected hope, fear, and determination, and he felt the weight of their trust. "Thank you all for being here," he started, his voice strong and steady. "We're facing a threat, but it's not just about buildings or land. It's about our way of life, our connections, and everything that makes these neighborhoods special. They think they can buy our community, but they're wrong. We're not for sale." A wave of applause erupted, cheers echoing across the park as people nodded in agreement, their resolve strengthening. "Together, we've shown what's possible when we fight for what matters," Henry continued. "And now it's time to take that spirit to every corner of our city. We will meet with city leaders, we will gather signatures, we will make sure they hear our voices loud and clear. Because this is more than just a protest, it's a movement, and every one of you here is a part of it." After Henry's speech, Tasha stepped up, her voice charged with passion as she laid out their plan of action. People broke into groups to organize petitions, plan rallies, and share stories that would be broadcast to gain public support. A network of neighborhoods formed, each one led by passionate residents ready to protect their community. Days turned into weeks, and the campaign against the developers gained momentum. Social media buzzed with posts, photos, and videos of people standing up for their neighborhoods. Community leaders, activists, and even local artists joined the cause, each bringing their unique talents and perspectives. One night, just as they were beginning to see traction, Henry received a message that the developers had countered with an enormous donation to city officials, hoping to expedite the approval process. For a moment, the wind seemed knocked out of him. But as he looked around at the photos on the community center walls, reminders of every person who had fought beside him, his resolve returned. The next morning, Henry called an emergency meeting. He stood before the gathered crowd, his face lined with determination. "They may have money," he said, his voice filled with quiet strength, "but we have something they can't buy. We have each other. We have a vision for the city that they don't understand, and as long as we're together, we're stronger than they could ever imagine." Over the following days, the campaign took on a life of its own. People who had never met stood side by side, pouring their hearts into rallies, speaking at city meetings, and flooding city officials' offices with calls and emails. The energy was infectious, and soon it became impossible to ignore. Then came the day of the final city council meeting. It was standing room only, and outside, hundreds of people gathered, holding signs that read, "Our city, our home," and "Community over profit." Henry, Tasha, Chief Blake, and other leaders from across the city stepped forward, each taking a turn to speak, each voice carrying the weight of a community's hope and pride. As Henry stood before the council, his eyes burning with determination, he spoke from the heart, his words resonating with every person in the room. "We've come together to remind you that this city belongs to its people. We're not here for a handout or a favor. We're here to protect what's ours." The council members exchanged glances, visibly moved by the overwhelming support for the movement. After hours of deliberation, they announced that they would halt the developers' plans and work with the community to protect historic and vital spaces across the city. The crowd erupted in cheers, people hugging each other, laughter and tears mingling in a moment of pure, hard-won joy. Henry felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him, knowing that they had not only saved their neighborhoods, but had also proven the power of a united community. That night, as the celebration continued outside the community center, Henry stood quietly in the midst of the crowd, watching as people from every neighborhood laughed, talked, and shared stories. Tasha, noticing him standing alone, walked over, a knowing smile on her face. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice warm with admiration, "look at what you've done. Look at what we've all done. None of this would have been possible without you." Henry shook his head, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "This wasn't just me, Tasha. It was all of us. It was every person who stood up, who believed in something bigger than themselves." She smiled, nodding. "Maybe. But you gave us the courage to believe it was possible." As the night wore on, Henry found himself back at his favorite bench in Willow Park, reflecting on everything they had accomplished. The city was safe for now, but he knew there would be more challenges, more battles to fight. And as he looked up at the night sky filled with stars that stretched endlessly above, he felt a surge of anticipation for what was yet to come. With a contented sigh, he leaned back, a small smile playing at his lips as he murmured to himself, "This is only the beginning." To all of you watching, if Henry's story has touched your heart and inspired you, please share your thoughts with us in the comments. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family, and hit subscribe to stay tuned for more stories like this. Together, we can make a difference, and remember, this is only the beginning.